Richard, unaware of Elijah's true identity, begged for a job. Elijah hired him to take revenge. His position was not as an executive. He would start at the lowest position, fetching coffee and handling menial tasks. A man who abandoned a pregnant woman years ago now unknowingly works under the son he left behind, only to realize too late that the boy he discarded has become his most powerful enemy. But before we start the video, let us know where you're watching this video, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, Story Store, and please share your thoughts about this story in comment section. The office was silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock. Richard Harrington, once a powerful businessman, stood frozen at the entrance. Across the sleek mahogany desk sat Elijah Carter, the young CEO of the company Richard had just joined. There was something unsettlingly familiar about him. Elijah leaned back, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Do you remember me, Mr. Harrington?" Richard's pulse quickened. He had spent years trying to rebuild his life after losing everything. He never imagined he would be sitting across from a man half his age, one who now held all the power. Elijah's fingers drummed against the desk, his expression unreadable. "It's funny, isn't it?" he mused. "You spent your life making and breaking people. And yet, here we are." Richard swallowed hard. He had built empires, destroyed rivals, and ruled with an iron fist. But this moment, this strange, unnerving moment, was unlike anything he had faced before. There was a sharp glint in Elijah's eyes, something more than just authority, something personal. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but no words came, because deep down a terrifying thought had begun to take root. Did he know this man? Richard's mind raced as he studied the young CEO before him. There was something disturbingly familiar about Elijah Carter, his eyes, his posture, even the way he smirked. It was like staring into a ghost from a life he had long buried. "You," Richard murmured, his voice unsteady. "You look familiar." Elijah chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Oh, I should," he said, his tone laced with bitterness. "I'm the son you abandoned." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He felt his breath hitch, his fingers tightening against the arms of his chair. Number? It couldn't be. This had to be a mistake. But as he looked closer, he saw it. The sharp edge of his own features reflected in Elijah's face, the same piercing gaze he once carried. Memories he had spent decades trying to forget came rushing back. A stormy night, Samantha's tear-streaked face, his own cold, unforgiving words. "This isn't happening." Elijah leaned forward, his smirk fading into something darker. "It's funny, isn't it? You walked away thinking the past wouldn't follow you. And yet, here I am." Richard swallowed hard, his mind spinning. He had spent his life controlling everything, bending the world to his will. But now, he was trapped in a game he didn't even realize he was playing. "And now," Elijah said, his voice dangerously calm, "we play by my rules." The rain poured relentlessly, turning the city streets into rivers of cold despair. Samantha stood beneath the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, shivering as the wind howled around her. Her clothes clung to her soaked skin, but the chill she felt ran deeper than the night air. Richard's last words still echoed in her mind. "You're a burden, Samantha. I have a future. I won't let you ruin it." He had turned his back on her without hesitation, leaving her alone, pregnant, and with nowhere to go. She had pleaded not for herself, but for the life growing inside her. But Richard Harrington had been unmoved. Tears mixed with the rain as she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. The world felt impossibly large, and she, insignificant. A bus stop became her shelter for the night, the cold bench pressing against her spine. She rested a trembling hand on her stomach, whispering to the child within, "I promise, I will never let anyone hurt you. We will survive, we will rise." That night, something changed in her. The girl who had once been fragile, who had depended on Richard's love, vanished. In her place, a woman was born, one determined to carve out a future, no matter how impossible it seemed. She worked endlessly, took jobs no one wanted, and studied while exhaustion clawed at her. There were nights when hunger gnawed at her, when sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she never wavered, because one day her child would stand tall, and Richard Harrington would know he had thrown away something priceless. And when that day came, he would regret everything. Samantha worked tirelessly, pushing through exhaustion, hunger, and rejection. She juggled multiple jobs, cleaning offices at dawn, waiting tables by day, and studying at night. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford, but failure was never an option. Elijah watched everything. He saw her come home with aching feet and empty pockets, yet she never complained. Instead, she would smile, ruffle his hair, and say, "We're fighters, Elijah. Strength isn't about what you have, it's about what you refuse to lose." Their world was unforgiving. Landlords threatened eviction, bills piled up, and there were nights when dinner was just a promise for tomorrow. But Samantha never wavered. She taught Elijah to stand tall, no matter how hard life pushed him down. "One day you'll show the world what you're capable of," she told him, her voice steady despite the weight of their struggles. And Elijah believed her. He learned that weakness invited cruelty, that the world respected power. He studied, absorbed knowledge like a sponge, and vowed to become someone no one could overlook. He wouldn't just survive. He would rise. And when he did, he would make sure the world, especially one man, knew exactly who he was. Elijah never forgot his mother's sacrifices. While others played, he studied. While they rested, he worked. He devoured books on business, learned the art of negotiation, and sought out mentors who shaped his sharp, strategic mind. By his 20s, he had built an empire from nothing. Every deal, every victory, every calculated risk brought him closer to one unspoken goal. And then, fate handed him the perfect opportunity. Richard Harrington, once untouchable, once powerful, was now just another man looking for a job. He had no idea who Elijah truly was. Elijah watched him, his expression unreadable. The man who had abandoned him now sat across the table, desperate. But Elijah wasn't that helpless child anymore. He had the power now. A slow smirk played on his lips. "This is only the beginning, Richard. Let's see how it feels to start at the bottom." Richard Harrington sat in the pristine office, desperation etched on his face. He had lost everything, his fortune, his influence, his name. Now, he was just another applicant, pleading for a second chance. Elijah Carter leaned back in his chair, studying the man before him. Richard had no idea who he truly was. No idea that fate had led him straight into the hands of the son he had discarded long ago. "You'll start at the bottom," Elijah said smoothly. "Office assistant, fetching coffee, handling errands." Richard stiffened. He had once commanded boardrooms, controlled empires. Now he was being asked to run trivial tasks, but he had no choice. He swallowed his pride and accepted. As Richard left the room, Elijah watched him go, a quiet satisfaction settling in. This was just the beginning. He didn't want revenge, not yet. First, he wanted Richard to understand what it felt like to be powerless. To be nothing. Richard Harrington was used to command, to having people jump at his slightest request. Now, he was nothing more than an errand boy. Each day was a slow, agonizing descent into humiliation. Employees who once admired him now barely acknowledged his presence. His new role: fetching coffee, running mundane errands, staying late to clean up after meetings. The whispers, the smirks, the dismissive glances, they cut deeper than he expected. Elijah watched from a distance, unreadable, yet fully in control. Every task, every demand was designed to chip away at the man who once believed he was untouchable. But Richard still held on to something. A quiet arrogance, a belief that he could rise again. He had lost everything before and rebuilt his empire. Surely he could do it again. Elijah smirked. Not this time. Richard didn't realize the true depth of the game being played. He thought this was rock bottom. He had no idea how much further he had to fall. The office was nearly empty when Richard sat down at his small desk, rubbing his temples. Exhaustion clung to him, but something deeper gnawed at his mind, a feeling he couldn't shake. With a sigh, he opened a drawer, searching for a pen. His fingers brushed against something thin and worn. Frowning, he pulled it out. A photograph. The paper was slightly creased, but the image was clear. A young woman with tired yet kind eyes held a baby in her arms. She was smiling, though sadness lingered behind it. Richard's breath hitched. Samantha. His heart pounded as he stared at the baby in her arms. The face was small, innocent, but familiar. A sickening realization crept over him, cold and undeniable. Elijah is my son. The thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. Memories he had long buried surged forward. Samantha's tearful pleas, his harsh words, the night he walked away without looking back. His fingers tightened around the photo. Is this why Elijah hired me? The way he watched, the way he controlled every move Richard made. It wasn't random, it was calculated. The humiliation, the power shift, the stripping away of his dignity, it all made sense now. Richard's mouth went dry, his entire world tilted. Did Elijah want revenge? Or was this something worse? For the first time, Richard wasn't sure if he could fix what had been broken, or if he was already too late. Richard paced outside Elijah's office, his pulse hammering. He had faced ruthless competitors, financial ruin, and betrayals, but nothing had ever felt this impossible. How did he even begin to make things right? Finally, he stepped inside. Elijah sat behind his grand desk, cool and unreadable. He didn't look surprised to see Richard standing there. If anything, he looked amused. Elijah. Richard hesitated, the name foreign on his tongue. He swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. Elijah leaned back, arms crossed. You don't get to call me that, he said, his voice calm but sharp as glass. You lost that right a long time ago. Richard flinched. I made mistakes. Elijah let out a cold, humorless chuckle. Mistakes? Is that what you call it? His eyes darkened. You destroyed lives. You left my mother with nothing. You never looked back. Regret weighed heavy in Richard's chest. I thought I was doing what was best. I was young, selfish. You don't get to justify it. Elijah's voice was ice. You think words can fix what you did? He shook his head. You haven't even begun to pay. Richard exhaled shakily. Then tell me what I can do. Elijah's lips curled into a smirk, but his eyes were cold. Oh, you'll find out, he said smoothly, but I promise you, this is far from over. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as employees gathered, confused by the sudden meeting. Elijah stood at the front, calm yet commanding, his sharp gaze locked onto Richard. Richard, still unaware of what was coming, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the stairs. Then Elijah spoke. "Let me introduce you to Richard Harrington," he said, his voice cold yet steady. "A man who once ruled boardrooms, a man who thrived on power, a man who—" He paused, letting the tension build, abandoned his own son before he was even born. A stunned silence followed, then the whispers began. Richard felt his blood run cold. "This man," Elijah continued, pacing slowly, "built his empire on ruthlessness. He crushed anyone in his way. He believed money and power would shield him forever. But tell me, Mr. Harrington," he turned, eyes dark with intensity, "how does it feel to be powerless now?" Richard swallowed hard. He could feel the judgment in the room, the weight of his past crashing down on him. The powerful businessman he had once been was gone. He was exposed, stripped of his arrogance, his legacy crumbling before his eyes. Elijah watched him closely, searching for any sign of remorse. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Elijah smirked. "Good," he thought. Let him feel the shame he never cared about before. But deep inside, a question lingered. Was this truly enough? From the shadows of the hallway, Samantha watched the scene unfold. The man who had once cast her aside, who had left her to struggle alone, now stood humiliated before an audience. The mighty Richard Harrington had been reduced to nothing more than a shattered figure, drowning in the weight of his past. She had imagined this moment for years, how justice would finally catch up with him. Yet, now that it was here, she felt no hatred, no desire for revenge, only a quiet sense of victory. Her gaze shifted to Elijah. He stood tall, powerful, and in complete control. He was everything she had hoped he would become, strong, determined, and unbreakable. He had turned pain into power, and for that she was proud. A soft smile touched her lips. "That's my boy." She thought back to the nights she spent holding him close, whispering promises that they would survive, that they would rise. And they had. Richard had underestimated them both. He had believed she would fade into obscurity, that his absence would define them. But instead, it had fueled their fire. As she turned to leave, she took one last look at Richard. He was learning what it meant to be powerless. And for the first time in years, Samantha felt free. The office was silent when Richard finally stood before Elijah, his shoulders weighed down by defeat. The room, where he once would have commanded respect, now felt suffocating. He had nothing left, no power, no influence, no legacy. Elijah leaned back in his chair, studying the man before him. He had spent years imagining this moment, picturing Richard broken, begging for forgiveness. But now that it was here, he felt something unexpected. Emptiness. Revenge had been satisfying, but was it enough? "I could end this now," Elijah said, his voice steady. "Destroy whatever's left of your reputation, leave you with nothing, just like you did to us." Richard didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "I deserve that." Elijah tapped his fingers against the desk. "Maybe, but I'm giving you a choice." He leaned forward. "You can walk away, disappear into obscurity, or you can prove that you're more than the man you used to be." Richard's eyes narrowed. "How?" "Work," Elijah said simply. "No shortcuts, no power plays. Start from the bottom, earn respect, if you can." Richard hesitated. Could he truly change? Did he even deserve the chance? "I'll do it," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Elijah studied him for a long moment before nodding. "We'll see." As Richard turned to leave, Elijah exhaled. This had never been just about revenge. It was about justice. But could redemption ever be real? Only time would tell.